The PGA Tour doesn't find itself at the center of a bombshell overnight. Sometimes it begins with one executive believing he can silence the one voice the game has trusted for generations. Brian Rolapp's reported attempt to rein in Jack Nicklaus didn't just spark another controversy, it ignited a backlash that drew some of golf's biggest legends into the fight. Jack Nicklaus said something about the state of professional golf that someone in a corner office didn't like. And instead of a conversation, a simple, respectful dialogue between two men who represent vastly different eras of this sport, the PGA Tour sent a message through the chain of command. That's the polite version. What it actually meant was this: stick to the golden years, the ceremonial tee shots, the handshakes at the Masters. Leave the business of golf to the people who run it now. The man behind the memo, Brian Rolapp, the PGA Tour's chief media officer, a former NFL executive who has never broken par under Sunday pressure. And he just tried to silence the greatest player who ever lived. But here's what Rolapp and the corporate structure of the PGA Tour failed to understand about Jack Nicklaus. He didn't win 18 major championships by backing down, and he certainly didn't earn the right to be silenced by someone who sees golf as a spreadsheet, not a sport. Before we go any further, I want to hear from you. Drop your age in the comments and tell me when you first started following golf. And if you enjoy deep dives into the biggest stories in golf, make sure to subscribe so you never miss what's next. Rolapp joined the PGA Tour in 2021 as Chief Media Officer. Before that, he spent over a decade at the NFL Network, building a reputation as a sharp, corporate-minded media executive. He negotiated massive broadcast deals. He understood the power of leverage, and he brought that same aggressive, bottom-line approach to professional golf. But here's the thing. Rolapp didn't come up through golf. He didn't carry clubs as a kid dreaming of the Masters. He came from the boardroom, from spreadsheets, from the cold calculations of television rights and revenue projections. And to be fair, that's exactly what the PGA Tour hired him to do. He wasn't brought in to preserve tradition. He was brought in to protect the bottom line, to negotiate the next media deal, to position the PGA Tour as a modern sports entertainment property. But when that corporate mindset collides with the culture of a game that predates every executive in the building, something has to give. And in this case, Rolapp decided it was going to be Jack Nicklaus. That was the miscalculation. The assumption that a title, Chief Media Officer, carried more weight than the man who built the entire sport. Rolapp operates in a world where the entity is the power. The PGA Tour is the brand. The players, even the greats, are assets. And in that world, no asset gets to criticize the company, no matter how many green jackets they own. So what exactly did Jack Nicklaus say that triggered Brian Rolapp's memo? It wasn't an inflammatory rant. It wasn't a personal attack on the commissioner. It was the kind of measured, thoughtful critique that Nicklaus has offered for decades. Nicklaus had expressed concern about the direction of professional golf, the fragmentation caused by the LIV golf split, the erosion of the tour's tradition, the way money had begun to override the integrity of the competition. He suggested that the PGA Tour's leadership had become too corporate, too disconnected from the players who actually built the game. And here's the part that really got under the tour's skin. Nicklaus implied that the current leadership was more interested in protecting their own positions than protecting the game itself. He didn't name names. He didn't have to. Everyone knew who he was talking about. In a separate interview, Nicklaus also questioned whether the PGA Tour had become too focused on fighting LIV Golf instead of fixing its own issues. He pointed out that the tour had lost its way in the pursuit of the Saudi dollar, and that the players were caught in the middle. Those comments landed like grenades, not because they were radical, but because they came from Jack Nicklaus, the one man whose opinion cannot be dismissed, the one voice that carries more weight than any executive, any commissioner, any corporate memo. And that's when Brian Rolapp decided to act, to send the message that even Jack Nicklaus was not above the corporate chain of command, who spoke on the condition of anonymity for fear of reprisal. Brian Rolapp's office sent a communication to Nicklaus's representatives. The language was corporate, bureaucratic, and unmistakable in its intent. The message essentially stated that Nicklaus's recent public comments were not aligned with the PGA Tour's strategic direction, and that the Tour's leadership would appreciate it if he would, and these are the key words, carefully evaluate the impact of his future statements. That is professional corporate speak for keep your mouth shut or there will be consequences. Now, what were the consequences? That part was left intentionally vague, which is exactly how power works in these situations. The threat doesn't need to be explicit, it just needs to be understood. The memo also reportedly suggested that Nicklaus's ongoing role in tour events could be reconsidered if he continued to undermine leadership publicly. That's the part that truly crossed a line. The implication that a man who won 18 majors might find himself excluded from the tournaments he helped build. Rolapp has denied that any threat was made. He called the interpretation of the memo inaccurate, said it was simply a discussion about messaging, standard corporate communication. But here's what's missing from that version. If it was just a discussion about messaging, why was it private? Why was Jack Nicklaus, who has been speaking publicly for over 50 years, suddenly being asked to reconsider his words after all this time? The memo didn't just land with Nicklaus, it landed with every player and legend who had ever considered speaking out. It was a message to the entire alumni network. Stay quiet, fall in line, or face the same treatment. Before we go any further, I want to hear your opinion. If you were in Jack Nicklaus's position, would you have stayed silent or spoken out no matter the consequences? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you enjoy golf stories that go beyond the headlines, make sure to subscribe because we've got plenty more coming. Tom Watson, Nicklaus's great rival and friend, was among the first to speak publicly. Watson, who has never been shy about his disdain for the modern corporate direction of golf, didn't mince words. He called the attempt to silence Nicklaus unconscionable and said the PGA Tour had lost its way. In an interview, Watson said that if someone had tried to silence him, he would have laughed in their face, but he also noted that Nicklaus is too classy to publicly fight back. That's what made the memo so shameful. Gary Player, the South African legend and another voice of authority, went further. He suggested that the current leadership, including Rolapp, had forgotten who built the tour, that they saw the players as rented talent rather than the foundation of everything the sport had become. Player reminded everyone that without Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, and the other early legends, there would be no PGA Tour for Brian Rolapp to manage. Lee Trevino, always the most direct, said the memo was a sign of panic, that the PGA Tour was nervous about its future and taking it out on the people who made its past. Trevino joked that Rolapp should try hitting a 5-iron out of a fairway bunker before telling Jack Nicklaus what to say. But here's the most powerful part of this story. These men had no reason to speak. They're not on the payroll. They don't need the tour. They could have stayed quiet, enjoyed their retirement, and watched the drama unfold from a distance, but they didn't, because they understand something the corporate structure doesn't. Golf is a fellowship. It's a brotherhood that spans generations. When you try to silence one legend, you silence all of them. And the legends of this game do not go quiet. The PGA Tour is in the fight of its existence. LIV Golf has poached some of the biggest names in the sport. The Saudi-backed league has money the tour can't match, and a vision that threatens the monopoly the PGA Tour has held for decades. And in the face of that threat, the tour has become defensive, controlling, and increasingly fearful. Brian Rolapp's job is to protect the brand, to prevent defections, to maintain the narrative that the PGA Tour is still the home of the game's most meaningful competition. And when a figure as revered as Nicklaus begins to critique that narrative, begins to express concern about the tour's direction, that is a direct threat to the corporate strategy. You can't argue with Nicklaus's record. You can't dismiss his insight. So the only option is to try to manage him, to suggest that he should be seen and not heard. But that strategy ignores the fundamental reality of golf. It's not like other sports. The players aren't employees. They're independent contractors. And the legends, the ones who built the reputation of the tour in the first place, they aren't bound by contracts. They're bound by nothing except loyalty to the game itself. And when that loyalty is questioned, when the corporate arm of the tour tries to control the public voice of the game's greatest champion, something breaks. The trust that existed between players and management, the assumption that the tour was a partnership, not a dictatorship. No, in fact, the exact opposite happened. Nicklaus has continued to speak his mind, and he's done so with more authority than before. So, here's where I'll leave you. Brian Rolapp sent a memo. Jack Nicklaus didn't stop talking. And the golf world watched two very different versions of power collide. One version says authority flows from the top. Those who run the tour get to decide what can be said and who can say it. The other version says authority is earned over a lifetime, that no memo can undo the weight of 18 majors. That leadership isn't given, it's built. Who is right in this situation? I'm not going to answer that. That's yours to decide. Was Brian Rolapp just doing his job, protecting the PGA Tour's brand in a competitive environment? Or did he overstep by trying to silence a legend who has given more to the game than any executive ever will? Drop your verdict in the comments. Tell me who you side with and where you're watching from. Country, city, doesn't matter. And if this is the kind of golf content you want, deep dives into the stories that matter, hit the subscribe button.